Last Tuesday, my mother-in-law marched into my home with 6 of her country club friends, pointed at me like I was hired help, and announced I'd be serving them tea and finger sandwiches for the next 3 hours. When I politely declined, she raised her voice and declared that as the family matriarch, I owed her this courtesy. That's when Marcus, my bodyguard, stepped into the room and asked in his calm professional voice, "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" What happened next changed everything in my family forever. And honestly, I should have seen it coming years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Vivian. I'm 29 years old, and my life isn't exactly what people expect when they hear I have a bodyguard. I'm not a celebrity or a politician's daughter. My husband Ethan inherited a successful tech company called Meridian Solutions from his father 3 years ago. And with it came some uncomfortable realities. The company's government contracts and high-profile clients mean we occasionally deal with people who don't appreciate our work. Nothing dramatic, mostly disgruntled former employees or competitors trying to intimidate us, but enough that our security consultant recommended personal protection. Marcus has been with us for 8 months now. He's this quietly competent former military guy in his early 40s who somehow manages to be both invisible and reassuring at the same time. Most days he's just there in the background, checking doors, scanning rooms, making sure our 2 kids, 7-year-old Sophia and 4-year-old Oliver, can play in the backyard without anyone worrying about their safety. The kids adore him because he knows magic tricks and can fold napkins into perfect paper airplanes. We live in Willowbrook Heights, an upscale suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. It's the kind of place where everyone drives luxury SUVs and the HOA has opinions about mailbox colors. Our house sits on 2 acres with a circular driveway, which sounds impressive until you realize it came with Ethan's mother, Cordelia, thinking she could treat it like her personal estate. Cordelia is 58, recently widowed, and has never worked a day in her life. When Ethan's father passed away and left everything to Ethan instead of her, she took it as a personal insult to her status as the family matriarch. She moved into a smaller house just 15 minutes away, close enough to drop by unannounced, which she does at least twice a week. She has very specific ideas about how wealthy families should operate, most of which involve me behaving like domestic staff rather than her son's equal partner. Before Meridian Solutions became our responsibility, I worked as a marketing director for a nonprofit that helped small businesses in underserved communities. I loved that job. The creativity, the impact, the team I'd built. But when Ethan inherited the company, we quickly realized he needed someone he could trust to handle the business development side while he focused on the technical operation. I had the skills, the business degree, and frankly, we couldn't afford to hire someone from outside to handle such sensitive client relationships. So I stepped into a role as Meridian's Director of Strategic Partnership. It wasn't my dream job, but it was our family's future, and I threw myself into it completely. I spend my days negotiating contracts with federal agencies, managing relationships with Fortune 500 clients, and occasionally traveling to secure new business. Last month, I closed a deal worth $2.3 million. The month before that, I presented our cybersecurity solutions to a room full of Department of Defense officials. But according to Cordelia, I'm just a glorified secretary who got lucky by marrying her son. She's made this opinion clear in countless small ways over the past 3 years. When I come home from a 12-hour day of client meetings, she'll comment that I look tired from all that busy work. When I mention a successful presentation or a new contract, she changes the subject to how Ethan's father would have handled things differently. She's introduced me to her friends as Ethan's wife who helps out at the office, and once told our neighbor that she worries Ethan works too hard because some people aren't cut out for real responsibility. The most frustrating part is how she weaponizes traditional gender roles when it suits her. She'll criticize me for working too much, then turn around and suggest I'm not contributing enough to the family finances. She'll complain that I don't cook elaborate Sunday dinners, then make passive-aggressive comments about how I'm playing career woman instead of focusing on my children. Ethan tries to navigate between us, but he's never directly confronted his mother's behavior. His usual response is to change the subject or make excuses about how she's still adjusting to life without his father. I understand grief. I really do. But grief doesn't give someone license to treat their daughter-in-law like hired help. The irony is that I actually handle most of our household management on top of my work responsibilities. I coordinate the kids' schedules, manage our housekeepers' visits, plan family activities, and handle all the social obligations that come with Ethan's business position. We have help with cleaning and yard work, but I'm still the one making sure everything runs smoothly. Our days start early. I'm usually up by 6 a.m., getting the kids ready for school while reviewing client emails on my phone. Marcus arrives at 7:30, does his security check of the house and cars, then either stays with the family or accompanies me to meetings depending on the day's schedule. The kids get dropped off at Eastmount Academy, a private school where Oliver goes to pre-K and Sophia is in second grade. My office is a converted study in our house, which gives me flexibility but also means Cordelia feels free to interrupt my video calls or rearrange my schedule without asking. She has a key to our house, something Ethan insisted on for family emergencies, and she uses it liberally. Most evenings we try to have family dinner together. Ethan comes home around 6:30, I wrap up whatever client work I'm handling, and we sit down with the kids to talk about their day. It's one of my favorite parts of our routine, especially when Marcus joins up. He has this way of asking Sophia about her art projects and Oliver about his building blocks that makes them light up. But at least twice a week, our peaceful evening gets interrupted by Cordelia's unannounced visit. She'll sweep in during dinner, critique whatever we're eating, make some comment about how the children need more structure, and then settle in like she's planning to stay for hours. That's exactly what led to last Tuesday's confrontation. But before I tell you how Marcus asking one simple question changed everything, you need to understand just how far Cordelia's sense of entitlement had grown, and why I'd finally reached my breaking point with her demand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cordelia Whitmore Sterling wasn't born into wealth, but she sure acts like she invented it. She grew up in a middle-class family in suburban Pinehurst, the daughter of a bank manager and a part-time bookkeeper. But when she married Ethan's father, Richard Sterling, at age 23, she transformed herself into what she believed a wealthy man's wife should be: perfectly polished, socially connected, and utterly convinced of her own superiority. For 35 years, she lived a life she'd always dreamed of. Richard built Meridian Solutions from a small IT consulting firm into a multi-million-dollar government contractor, and Cordelia built herself into the perfect executive wife. She joined the Willowbrook Country Club, chaired charity galas, and made sure everyone knew the Sterling name meant something in this town. She had her hair done twice a week at Magnolia Salon, her nails maintained at exactly the right length, and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The problem was, Cordelia never developed an identity beyond being Richard's wife. She didn't have hobbies, real friendships, or interests outside of maintaining her social status. When Richard died suddenly of a heart attack 3 years ago, she didn't just lose her husband, she lost her entire sense of purpose and control. Richard's will left everything to Ethan, which made perfect business sense. Ethan had worked at Meridian for 8 years, understood the clients, and had the technical background to run a cybersecurity company. Cordelia received a generous life insurance payout and a trust fund that guaranteed her financial security forever, but she didn't get control of the family business or the family home where we now live. That's when her true personality emerged. Cordelia has this way of making herself the victim in every situation, while simultaneously trying to control everyone around her. She'll show up at our house uninvited, and then act hurt when I suggest she should call for. She'll criticize my parenting choices and then claim she's just trying to help when I push back. She's mastered the art of the backhanded compliment, delivered with perfect timing to cause maximum damage. Her favorite targets are my work and my role as a mother. Last month, during a family barbecue, she watched me take a business call, and then announced to everyone within earshot, "I just don't understand how modern mothers can focus on their children when they're always thinking about work." In my day, we understood priority. When I mentioned that the call had secured a contract that would pay for both kids' college educations, she smiled sweetly and said, "Well, I suppose some mothers need to work. We can't all be blessed with husbands who can provide everything." She has this talent for making me feel guilty about things I should be proud of. When I won a business development award from the Greater Willowbrook Chamber of Commerce, she said, "How nice that they recognized your contribution." I'm sure Richard would have been proud to see his company getting attention. Notice how she made it about Richard's company, not my work. Her social circle consists of 6 other country club wives, who seem to exist solely to validate each other's opinions and gossip about anyone who doesn't meet their standards. There's Beatrice Ashworth, whose husband owns half the commercial real estate in town, Margaret Thornfield, who inherited a textile fortune and never lets anyone forget it, Priscilla Vanderberg, whose family has old money, dating back 4 generations, Constance Fairchild, whose husband is a federal judge, Lydia Pemberton, whose pharmaceutical fortune means she thinks she's qualified to give medical advice, and Florence Hartwell, whose husband built a shipping empire. Together, they form what I privately call the Willowbrook Judgment Committee. They meet twice a week, once for tennis at the country club, and once for lunch at Cordelia's house. Their conversations revolve around criticizing other women's choices: who's working too much, who's not involved enough in their children's lives, who's gained weight, whose husband is rumored to be struggling financially, whose kids aren't attending the right school. Cordelia uses these women as validators for her treatment of me. She'll tell them stories about my selfish career focus, or my unconventional parenting choices, then come back to me with, "Well, Beatrice thinks," or "Margaret mentioned that in her day." It's like having a chorus of disapproval following her around, giving her ammunition for every criticism. The woman has never held a job, never managed a budget beyond household expenses that someone else earned, never dealt with difficult clients or impossible deadlines. But she's absolutely convinced she could run my life better than I can. She frequently makes comments about how she managed Richard's career by hosting dinner parties and making the right social connection. She seems to believe that schmoozing at charity events is equivalent to negotiating million-dollar contracts with federal agencies. Her sense of entitlement extends to our home, our schedule, and our children. She has opinions about everything: the organic food I buy, unnecessary expense and probably tasteless, the extracurricular activities I choose for the kids, too structured, children need free play, the way I handle discipline, too permissive, children need firm boundary, and even the decor in our house, too modern, a family home should feel warm and traditional. But it's not just the opinions, it's the way she delivers them. Cordelia has perfected the art of the concerned suggestion that's actually a demand. She'll say things like, "I was thinking it might be nice if the children spent more time at my house on weekends. They need to understand their heritage," or "I noticed you've been working late again. Perhaps you should consider whether this job is really worth the strain on your family." The most infuriating part is how she positions herself as the family expert on everything. When Sophia was having trouble with math last year, Cordelia suggested that I was too busy to notice my daughter was struggling, and offered to hire a tutor herself. When Oliver went through a phase of not wanting to go to bed, she diagnosed it as seeking attention because his mother is distracted by work demands. She has this way of undermining my authority as a parent while pretending to be helpful. She'll give the kids candy before dinner and then say, "Oh, I hope that's okay. I know some mothers are strict about sugar, but I believe in letting children enjoy life." She'll let them stay up past bedtime when they're at her house, and then comment about how they seem more relaxed after spending time with her. Cordelia also loves to remind everyone that she raised Ethan successfully as proof of her parenting expertise. What she doesn't mention is that Ethan had a full-time nanny until he was 12, attended boarding school from age 13 to 18, and spent most holidays with his prep school friends because his parents were traveling. She talks about raising him like she was a hands-on mother when in reality she hired professionals to handle the actual parenting while she focused on her social obligation. The woman keeps a mental scoreboard of every slight, real or imagined, and she's not above using emotional manipulation to get what she wants. If I set a boundary, she becomes the wounded grandmother who just wants to be involved in her grandchildren's. If I suggest she should coordinate her visits with our schedule, Suddenly I'm the controlling daughter-in-law who's trying to keep her from her family. Her latest obsession is what she calls proper entertainment. She's convinced that because Ethan now runs a successful company, we should be hosting elaborate dinner parties and social events to maintain the family's reputation in the community. Never mind that most of our clients are government agencies that don't care about our social calendar, or that I'm already managing a full-time career and 2 children. Last month she started dropping hints about how successful families open their homes to their social circle. When I didn't take the hint, the suggestions became more direct. She started mentioning specific events I should host, guest lists I should consider, and caterers I should hire. When I explained that between work and the kids, I didn't have time to plan elaborate social events, she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. That's when I realized that in Cordelia's mind, my role in this family isn't as Ethan's equal partner or as a successful businesswoman in my own right. To her, I'm the hired help who happens to be married to her son. I'm supposed to handle the household management, the child rearing and the social obligations, while she gets to be the respected family matriarch who approves or disapproves of my performance. What I didn't realize yet was just how far she was willing to go to put me in what she considered my proper place. The pattern started small, like most toxic behaviors do. 3 months after we moved into the Sterling family home, Cordelia began what she called family coordination meetings. Every other Sunday she'd arrive at 10 a.m. sharp with a leather-bound planner and a list of upcoming social obligations that she believed required our participation. These weren't requests, they were announcements. The Thornfield anniversary party on Saturday the 5th, the charity auction for the Children's Hospital on the 22nd, the country club's annual spring gala in April. She'd read through the list like a secretary delivering a schedule to her boss, then look at me expectantly for confirmation that I'd handle the preparation. The first few times I tried to be accommodating, I understood that as the new Mrs. Sterling, certain social expectations came with the territory. I RSVP'd to events, arranged babysitters, even bought appropriate dresses for galas where tickets cost $5. But accommodation turned into assumption, and assumption turned into entitlement. By month 6, Cordelia wasn't just informing me about events, she was volunteering my services for them. I'd get calls from Margaret Thornfield asking about the appetizer selection I was supposedly coordinating for her daughter's engagement party. Beatrice Ashworth would stop by to discuss the flower arrangements I was apparently managing for the hospital fundraiser. I'd stand there confused, only to discover that Cordelia had told everyone I'd handle the catering, decorations or logistics for events I'd never agreed to help with. When I confronted her about volunteering my time without asking, she'd give me this incredulous look and say something like, "I assumed you'd want to contribute to the community, these are important causes, Viv." If I pushed back, she'd shift to disappointment mode. "I suppose I misunderstood your interest in being part of this family's traditions." The holiday situation became a masterclass in boundary violations. Thanksgiving was my first real glimpse into how Cordelia operated. 2 weeks before the holiday, she called to inform me that dinner would be at our house this year because the Sterling home has always hosted family gatherings. When I mentioned that I'd already made plans to have Thanksgiving with my parents, whom I hadn't seen in 6 months due to work travel, she looked genuinely shocked. "Oh, I'm sure your parents will understand," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "This is about family tradition. Besides, your mother-in-law's needs should come first now." She'd already invited Ethan's uncle's family from Boston, his cousin from Philadelphia, and her entire social circle. 16 people, with less than 2 weeks' notice, and somehow it was my responsibility to coordinate everything. I spent that Thanksgiving cooking for 3 days straight while Cordelia held court in the living room, accepting compliments on her beautiful dinner and her perfectly appointed table. When someone asked about the homemade cranberry sauce, she smiled and said, "Oh, I had some help with the details." Help, like I was her sous chef instead of the person who'd planned, shopped for and prepared the entire meal. Christmas was work. Cordelia decided our house needed to be showcase ready for her annual holiday open house, an event I learned about when the invitations arrived in our mailbox. Apparently she'd been hosting this party for 20 years, and she wasn't about to let her son's marriage interrupt the tradition. Never mind that December was my busiest month at work, with year-end client reviews and contract renewals consuming 12-hour days. The week before the party, Cordelia appeared at my door every morning with new demands. The garland on the staircase needed to be full. The dining room table required a complete redesign. The guest bathroom needed fresh towels that coordinated with her color scheme. She'd hired a catering company, but somehow I was still responsible for managing their setup, directing the staff, and handling any problems that arose. During the party itself, I spent 4 hours in a cocktail dress and heels, refilling appetizer trays, coordinating coat check, and solving catering emergencies, while Cordelia socialized with her guests. When people complimented the beautiful evening, she graciously accepted their praise. When someone mentioned the delicious food presentation, she said, "I've always believed in attention to detail." The most infuriating part was how she'd positioned me as her assistant rather than her hostess partner. She'd introduce me to new people as Ethan's wife, who's been such wonderful help with the arrangements, not the co-host of the party in my own home, not the woman who'd handled 90% of the coordination, just helpful Vivian, who'd pitched in where needed. Spring brought the charity auction season, and Cordelia's expectations escalated. She volunteered me to chair the silent auction committee for the Children's Hospital fundraiser without asking. I found out when Constance Fairchild called to schedule our first planning meeting. When I explained that I hadn't agreed to chair anything, Constance sounded confused, but Cordelia said you were excited about taking leadership this year. She mentioned that you wanted to prove yourself to the community. The manipulation was breathtaking. Cordelia had not only volunteered my time, but also created a narrative where declining would make me look uncharitable and antisocial. I ended up chairing that committee, because backing out would have damaged relationships I needed for Ethan's business. For 3 months, I spent my evenings and weekends coordinating with vendors, managing volunteers, and ensuring that every donated item was properly cataloged and displayed. The auction raised $180,000, the highest total in the event's history. At the thank you dinner, Cordelia stood up to give a speech about the importance of community service and family values. She mentioned how proud she was that the next generation was carrying on the sterling tradition of philanthropy. She never mentioned my name specifically, but she made sure everyone knew that her guidance had been instrumental in the event's success. The summer barbecue circuit introduced a new level of presumption. Cordelia would accept invitations to pool parties and garden gatherings on our behalf, then inform me about them later. "The Ashworths are expecting us Saturday at 2, she'd announce. "I told Beatrice you'd bring your famous potato salad." I didn't have a famous potato salad recipe. I barely had time to do grocery shopping, let alone develop signature dishes for social events. But refusing to attend would create drama that rippled through Ethan's business relationships. Beatrice's husband owned the office building, where 3 of our major clients had their headquarters. Margaret's husband served on the City Planning Commission that approved zoning for tech companies. These social connections weren't just pleasantries, they had real implications for Meridian's future, so I learned to make potato salad and garden pasta salad, and whatever else Cordelia committed me to bringing. I bought slow cookers and serving platters, and learned to coordinate outfit changes between client meetings and social obligations. My car's trunk became a mobile catering supply station, because I never knew when I'd need to transport food for events I'd been volunteered to attend. The school year brought parent involvement expectations that Cordelia somehow made about her. When Sophia started 2nd grade at Eastmount Academy, I joined the parent-teacher organization to stay connected with her education. Within a month, Cordelia was dropping hints about how involved families take leadership roles in school activity. She started attending PTO meetings herself, not because she had children at the school, but because she wanted to support her family's education commitment. She'd sit in the back row and nod approvingly when I volunteered for committees, then approach other parents afterward to discuss how wonderful it was to see young families getting involved in their community. By Halloween, I was coordinating the school's fall festival, managing the winter book fair, and planning the spring art show. Not because I'd volunteered for those roles, but because declining would have meant disappointing the grandmother who was so proud of my school involvement. The worst part was how Cordelia managed to make every success about her influence, while making every struggle about my shortcomings. When the fall festival raised record funds, she told everyone how she'd encouraged me to step up for the children. When I was exhausted from managing 3 major school events, while closing a $1.2 million client contract, she mentioned to other parents that some mothers just take on too much, and might need to learn better balance. Every conversation became a performance review where Cordelia evaluated my effectiveness as a wife, mother, and community member. Every social event became a test where she measured my ability to represent the Sterling family appropriately. Every holiday became a production where I provided the labor while she accepted the credit. The pattern was so gradual, so wrapped in family expectations and community obligations, that I almost didn't notice how completely my life had been reorganized around Cordelia's vision of what a Sterling family daughter-in-law should be. I'd become the manager of her social calendar, the coordinator of her family traditions, and the executor of her community commitments, and somehow she'd convinced everyone, including me for a while, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to serve. The most heartbreaking part of this entire situation wasn't Cordelia's behavior. It was watching the people who should have supported me either turn away or actively enable her treatment of me. At the center of this disappointment was my own husband, Ethan, who had perfected the art of conflict avoidance to such a degree that he'd essentially abandoned me to handle his mother alone. Ethan's response to every complaint about his mother followed the same predictable script. First came the acknowledgement, "I know she can be difficult." Then came the rationalization, "She's still adjusting to Dad's death." Finally came the deflection, "You know how important family is to her." Never once did he directly address her behavior, set boundaries, or defend me when she crossed lines. The worst part was how he'd frame my frustration as a character flaw, rather than a reasonable response to unreasonable treatment. When I told him about Cordelia volunteering me for the charity auction without asking, he said, "Maybe she thought you'd enjoy the leadership opportunity." When I explained that I was exhausted from managing events I never agreed to coordinate, he suggested I should learn to say no more gracefully. Ethan had been trained from childhood to manage his mother's emotions rather than challenge her behavior. Growing up with nannies and boarding schools, he'd learned that the path of least resistance was simply avoiding confrontation altogether. If his mother was upset, the solution was to give her what she wanted or find someone else to deal with the problem. Now that someone else was me. During family gatherings, I'd watch him physically retreat when his mother started making her pointed comments about my work schedule or parenting choices. He'd suddenly remember an important phone call he needed to make, or he'd engage Oliver in some elaborate game that required his complete attention. He'd developed an almost supernatural ability to be absent from the room whenever conflict arose. The few times I managed to corner him for serious conversations about his mother's behavior, he'd employ what I privately called therapeutic deflection. He'd turn the conversation back to my feelings rather than addressing the actual problem. "I can see you're really stressed about this," he'd say, as if my stress was the issue rather than his mother's boundary violations. "Maybe we should think about getting you some help managing everything." Getting me help, as if the problem was my inability to handle being voluntold for every social obligation in Willowbrook Heights, rather than his mother's assumption that she could commandeer my time and energy without permission. The most infuriating example came after the Christmas open house disaster. I'd spent 3 weeks coordinating every detail of an event I never agreed to host, then worked as unpaid catering staff at my own party while Cordelia accepted compliments for my work. When I tried to explain to Ethan how humiliated I felt being treated like hired help in my own home, he nodded sympathetically and said, "I really appreciate everything you did to make that evening special for Mom." Appreciably, I'd chosen to spend my holiday managing his mother's social event instead of being forced into it by her manipulation and his refusal to intervene. But Ethan wasn't the only family member who enabled Cordelia's behavior through strategic blindness. His uncle David, who attended most family gatherings, had perfected the art of witnessing her treatment of me without actually seeing it. During that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, he sat at our dining room table eating food I'd prepared for 3 days while Cordelia held court about her successful dinner. When she made a comment about how some people don't understand the importance of family traditions, David just smiled and asked for seconds on the stuffing. David's wife, Patricia, was even worse. She'd actively participate in conversations where Cordelia criticized my choices, offering supportive murmurs and knowing looks. When Cordelia mentioned that she worried about Sophia and Oliver getting enough stability with a working mother, Patricia nodded sagely and shared stories about how she'd always been available for her children's needs. She'd framed these as helpful anecdotes, but the message was clear: good mothers prioritize differently than I did. The broader family network operated on a system of willful ignorance that allowed Cordelia's behavior to continue unchecked. Ethan's cousin Michael would joke about how lucky Ethan was to have a wife who could handle everything, completely missing the fact that I wasn't choosing to handle everything. I was being assigned to handle everything. His wife Sarah would make comments about how capable I was, as if my competence justified the unlimited demands placed on my time. Even more frustrating was how they'd position Cordelia's behavior as normal family dynamics, rather than manipulation. When she'd volunteer my services for events without asking, they'd frame it as family coordination. When she'd criticize my parenting choices, they'd call it grandmotherly concern. When she'd take credit for my work, they'd say she was proud of the family's contributions to the community. The Sterling family had developed an entire vocabulary for avoiding accountability. Problems were misunderstandings, boundary violations were miscommunications, manipulation was family enthusiasm, and anyone who objected to this system was being overly sensitive or difficult to work with. This pattern extended beyond the immediate family to the broader social circle that enabled Cordelia's behavior. The country club wives who served as her validation committee never questioned why I was always the one coordinating events they planned together. They'd call me directly with logistics questions, changes to guest lists, or requests for additional services, treating me like a professional event coordinator rather than a peer who'd been voluntold to help. Beatrice Ashworth would phone me at 8 p.m. on weeknight to discuss table arrangements for parties I was supposedly co-hosting. Margaret Thornfield would drop by my office during business hours to review catering options for fundraisers I'd been assigned to manage. None of them seemed to find it odd that every social obligation in their circle somehow became my responsibility to execute. The most telling example was when Priscilla Vanderberg called me directly to complain about the flower arrangements at a luncheon I'd coordinated. She spent 15 minutes detailing everything wrong with the centerpieces, the color coordination, and the overall aesthetic presentation. When I finally asked why she was calling me instead of the professional florist who'd created the arrangements, she paused and said, "Well, Cordelia said you were managing the event details." Managing the event detail. I'd been transformed from a guest into an unpaid event coordinator. And everyone just accepted this as normal because Cordelia had decided it was my role. The business community wasn't much better. Ethan's professional relationships often overlapped with these social obligations, and his colleagues had learned to contact me directly about their wives' charity events or social gatherings. I'd get emails from the CFO of our biggest client, asking about auction donations for his wife's fundraiser, or calls from potential clients wanting to discuss sponsorship opportunities for events I was apparently coordinating. The most frustrating part was how this system made me look like the problem whenever I tried to push back. If I declined to coordinate an event, I wasn't just disappointing Cordelia, I was potentially damaging Ethan's business relation. If I questioned why I was always the one handling logistics, I looked uncooperative to people who were important to our financial future. Marcus was the only person in our entire social circle who seemed to recognize what was happening. I'd catch him watching these interactions with this carefully neutral expression that somehow conveyed both understanding and concern. During family gatherings, he'd position himself where he could observe the dynamics without appearing to eavesdrop. When Cordelia would make her pointed comments about my work schedule or parenting choices, I'd see him glance in my direction with something that looked like sympathy. But even Marcus maintained professional boundaries that prevented him from commenting on family dynamics. His job was to protect us from external threats, not to intervene in internal conflicts. So while he clearly saw what was happening, he couldn't address it directly without overstepping his role. The isolation created by this system of enablement was almost worse than Cordelia's behavior itself. I was surrounded by people who witnessed her treatment of me, benefited from my unpaid labor, and then acted like I was imagining problems that didn't exist. Every family gathering became a performance where I had to pretend everything was fine while being systematically devalued and exploited. The message was clear: my feelings, my time, and my boundaries were less important than maintaining the illusion of family harmony. And everyone around me had agreed to participate in that illusion, no matter what it cost me personally. The incidents that pushed me toward my breaking point didn't happen all at once. They accumulated like pressure in a steam valve, each one adding weight until something had to give. The first major escalation came during what I now call the birthday party ambush in early February. Oliver's 5th birthday was supposed to be a simple celebration. Just family, a few of his preschool friends, and pizza in our backyard. I'd planned everything weeks in advance. Superhero decorations, a bounce house rental, and a custom cake featuring his favorite cartoon character. Nothing elaborate, just the kind of party a 4-year-old would actually enjoy. 3 days before the party, Cordelia called with wonderful news. She'd taken the liberty of expanding the guest list to include her entire social circle because she thought it would be meaningful for Oliver to see how much the community cared about his family. She'd already sent out invitations, elegant cardstock with gold embossing that probably cost more than my original party budget, announcing a sterling family celebration at our home. When I explained that I'd planned a children's party, not an adult social event, she looked genuinely confused. "Well, of course we'll need to adjust the arrangements," she said, as if the solution was obvious. "Children's parties are lovely, but this is an opportunity to show Oliver how important his family is in Willowbrook Heights." The adjustments she had in mind transformed Oliver's birthday into a networking event that happened to feature a 5-year-old. She hired a catering company to replace the pizza, brought in a jazz quartet to provide appropriate ambiance, and rearranged our backyard to accommodate cocktail tables and a full bar setup. The bounce house looked ridiculous next to the elegant table linens and professional lighting she'd installed. The worst part was watching Oliver's confusion as his superhero-themed birthday party became a sophisticated garden party, where he was essentially his preschool friends looked overwhelmed by the formal atmosphere, while Cordelia's friends cooed over how well-behaved he was when he sat quietly instead of playing. When he asked if he could actually use the bounce house, Cordelia gently redirected him to visit with our guests instead. I spent the entire party managing catering logistics, directing service staff, and making sure Cordelia's social obligations were met, while my son's birthday wishes were completely ignored. When people complimented the sophisticated celebration, Cordelia graciously accepted their praise while mentioning how important it was to teach children about family values and community connection. The next escalation came during spring break, when I'd planned a family trip to the beach. Just Ethan, the kids, and me. We'd booked a modest rental house in Sayside Cove, about 3 hours away, where the kids could build sandcastles and we could actually relax for a week. I'd been looking forward to uninterrupted family time without social obligations or business calls. 2 weeks before our departure, Cordelia announced that she'd coordinated with the Ashworths, Thornfields, and Vanderbergs to turn our family vacation into a group retreat. She'd researched luxury rental properties in the same area and found a sprawling beachfront estate that could accommodate all 4 families properly. When I mentioned that we'd already paid for our rental house and were looking forward to quiet family time, she waved away my concern. "Oh, that little cottage will work perfectly for overflow guest rooms," she said, completely missing the point. "This way the children can socialize with their peers while the adults enjoy some meaningful conversation." I've already spoken with the estate management company about catering and activity coordination. Activity coordination. Somehow our family vacation had become another event for me to manage. Within days I was fielding calls from the other families about meal preferences, transportation arrangements, and daily schedules. Margaret Thornfield wanted to ensure the wine selection met her standard. Beatrice Ashworth needed detailed information about local restaurants for the dinner reservations I was apparently making. Priscilla Vanderberg sent me a 3-page list of dietary restrictions and activity suggestions. Our quiet beach week turned into a luxury resort experience, where I functioned as the unpaid social director. While other families relaxed on the beach, I coordinated group dinners, managed children's activities, and ensured that everyone's needs were met. The kids had fun playing with their friends, but Ethan and I never got the reconnection time we'd planned for. The breaking point of that trip came when Cordelia pulled me aside during a group dinner to discuss next year's arrangement. She'd already researched European vacation rentals that could accommodate even larger groups, and she wanted to start planning early to ensure proper coordination. She handed me a folder of property listings and contact information for international travel specialists, as if she'd assigned me a new project to manage. The summer brought what I started calling the garden party incident. Cordelia decided that our backyard was perfect for hosting the country club's annual member appreciation event, a fancy outdoor luncheon that traditionally rotated between different members' homes. She volunteered our property without asking, then informed me that I'd been selected to chair the planning committee. When I protested that I hadn't agreed to host or coordinate anything, she looked genuinely puzzled. "I thought you'd be pleased," she said. "This is quite an honor. The Hartwell family hosted last year, and their event was lovely, but I know you can exceed their standards." Exceed their standards. The Hartwells had hired a professional event planning company and spent close to $15,000 on their garden party. Cordelia expected me to surpass that level of sophistication while personally managing every detail of the planning and execution. The event required 3 months of preparation. I spent evenings and weekends coordinating with vendors, designing table arrangements, managing RSVPs, and handling the dozen daily crises that arise when organizing events for two. The morning of the party, I was at our house by 6 a.m. directing setup crews, managing catering deliveries, and solving last-minute problems while Cordelia got her hair and nails done at the salon. During the luncheon itself, she held court at the head table, graciously accepting compliments on her beautiful event and her impeccable taste in coordinating detail. When someone specifically mentioned the gorgeous floral arrangements that I'd spent weeks designing with our florist, she smiled and said, "I've always believed that personal attention to detail makes all the difference." Personal attention to detail. She'd contributed exactly 0 hours to the planning or execution, but somehow she'd provided the personal attention that made the event successful. The final escalation before my breaking point came during the fall fundraising season. Cordelia volunteered me to co-chair the Children's Hospital Gala, the biggest charity event of the year, with a $250,000 fundraising goal when I pointed out that I was already managing 2 other fundraisers and couldn't possibly take on a third major commitment, she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. "The hospital board specifically requested you," she said, which I later discovered was completely untrue. "Apparently your work on the spring auction made quite an impression. Besides, this is about the children, Vivian. I can't imagine you'd put your convenience ahead of helping sick children. She'd managed to frame my legitimate boundary setting as selfish indifference to pediatric healthcare. When I still hesitated, she mentioned that several of our major clients had corporate sponsorship budgets for charity events, and declining this opportunity might send the wrong message about Meridian's community commitment. I ended up co-chairing the gala, which consumed every spare moment I had for 4 months. Between my regular work responsibilities and managing the largest charity event in Willowbrook Heights, I was working 18-hour days and getting maybe 5 hours of sleep per night. The kids barely saw me during October and November because I was either at the office managing client crises, or at planning meetings coordinating auction items and vendor logistics. The gala was a massive success. We exceeded our fundraising goal by $50,000 and received recognition from the mayor for our contribution to the community. At the thank you ceremony, Cordelia stood at the podium talking about the Sterling family's commitment to charitable giving and community leadership. She mentioned how proud she was that the next generation was carrying on the family tradition of service. The next generation, as if my 4 months of unpaid labor and professional sacrifice was somehow the natural evolution of her family's philanthropy rather than the result of her manipulation and boundary violation. Each of these incidents followed the same pattern. Cordelia would volunteer my services without asking, frame my objections as selfishness or lack of family commitment, and then accept credit for the results while positioning herself as the wise matriarch who'd guided my effort. Meanwhile, I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and increasingly resentful of a system that treated my time and energy as unlimited resources for her social ambitions. The worst part was how these escalations were always framed as opportunities rather than imposition. According to Cordelia, I should be grateful for the chance to prove myself to the community, honored by the trust people placed in my abilities and proud to represent the Sterling family's values through my service. But I wasn't grateful anymore. I was furious, exhausted, and reaching the end of my capacity to maintain the illusion that any of this was normal or acceptable. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late November during what should have been a routine week. I was in my home office on a video call with the Department of Defense procurement team, discussing the final details of a $3.2 million cybersecurity contract that had taken 8 months to negotiate. This wasn't just any client meeting. It was the largest deal in Meridian's history, and the contract terms we finalized that afternoon would determine our company's trajectory for the next 3 years. The call had been scheduled for weeks. I'd prepared extensively, coordinating with our technical team, reviewing compliance requirements, and ensuring every detail was perfect. The Defense Department doesn't reschedule meetings for personal convenience, and this particular contract required approval from multiple departments before their fiscal year deadline. I was 20 minutes into explaining our enhanced encryption protocols when I heard the front door open, followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple voices in our foyer. Through my office window, I could see cars filling our circular driveway, expensive sedans and luxury SUVs that I recognized as belonging to Cordelia's social circle. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening, but I forced myself to stay focused on the call. Colonel Martinez was asking detailed questions about our implementation timeline, and I couldn't afford to lose concentration during such a critical negotiation. I closed my office door and continued the discussion, hoping whatever was happening in the rest of my house would resolve itself quietly. 15 minutes later, there was a sharp knock on my office door. Before I could respond, Cordelia walked in without waiting for permission. She was dressed in her country club finest, a cream-colored suit with gold jewelry that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Behind her, I could see her entire social committee crowded in my hallway, peering into my office with curious expressions. "Vivian, dear," she said in the artificially sweet voice she used when she wanted something, "we need you in the dining room. I've arranged a lovely afternoon tea for the ladies, and you know how important proper service is for these gatherings." I held up one finger and muted my microphone, trying to keep my voice calm. "Cordelia, I'm in the middle of a business call, a very important business call that I scheduled weeks ago. You can't just show up with 6 people and expect me to drop everything." She looked genuinely confused, as if my objection made no sense. "Oh, this will only take a few hours. I'm sure your little meeting can wait. The ladies are expecting proper hospitality, and you know I can't manage all the serving myself at my age." Her little meeting. She'd just dismissed the most important contract negotiation in our company's history as a little meeting that could be postponed for her social obligation. And somehow in her mind, providing proper hospitality to her friends was my responsibility, not hers. I unmuted the microphone and apologized to Colonel Martinez, explaining that I had an unexpected interruption but could continue in just a moment. I muted again and turned back to Cordelia, who was now looking impatient. "I am not leaving this call," I said firmly. "This contract is worth over $3 million to our family's business. You need to handle your own event or reschedule it for a time when you've actually asked permission to use my house." Cordelia's expression shifted from confusion to indignation. "Permission? This is the Sterling family home, Vivian. I don't need permission to bring family friends here for tea. And frankly, I think your priorities are skewed if you're putting work ahead of family obligations." Family obligation. Serving tea to her bridge club was now a family obligation that superseded the contract that would pay for her grandchildren's college educations and secure our financial future for years. "The only family obligation I have right now is to secure this contract for my husband's company," I replied. "You need to leave my office immediately, so I can finish this call." Instead of leaving, Cordelia raised her voice loud enough that I was certain the women in the hallway could hear every word. This is exactly what I've been worried about. You're so obsessed with playing businesswoman that you can't be bothered to show basic courtesy to your family's guests. These women are pillars of our community, and they deserve better treatment than this playing businesswoman. 3 years of managing million-dollar contracts, building relationships with federal agencies, and contributing significantly to our family's income, and she still thought I was playing at having a career. Through the crack in my office door I could see Marcus appear at the end of the hallway. He'd obviously heard the raised voices and had come to assess the situation. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw him take in the scene, me trapped in my office with an important client on the phone, Cordelia blocking my doorway with her arms crossed, and 6 well-dressed women, clustered in the hallway watching the confrontation like it was dinner theater. I unmuted my microphone again and apologized to Colonel Martinez, who was clearly becoming impatient with the interruptions. I'm very sorry for the delays. Could we possibly continue this discussion in 10 minutes? I have an urgent matter to address. Meridian Sterling, Colonel Martinez replied in the tone that military personnel use when their time is being wasted. We have a room full of people here who've cleared their schedules for this call. If you're not available to finalize these terms today, we'll need to reschedule for next month, which may impact our budget approval timeline. Next month would be too late. If we missed their fiscal year deadline, this contract would go to one of our competitors, and we'd lose the most significant business opportunity in Meridian's history. I muted the microphone and looked directly at Cordelia. You have 30 seconds to get out of my office and handle your own social event, or I'm calling security to have you and your friends removed from my property. Cordelia's face flushed with anger, and her voice rose to a level that everyone in the house could clearly hear. Security? You're going to call security on your husband's mother? This is what I'm talking about. You have no respect for family, no understanding of priorities, and no appreciation for the women who've welcomed you into this community. The irony was breathtaking. She was accusing me of not understanding priorities while demanding that I abandon a multi-million-dollar contract negotiation to serve tea to her friends. She was talking about respect while barging into my office during a scheduled business call and refusing to leave when asked. But what happened next was the moment that changed everything. Cordelia turned toward the hallway and projected her voice so that her entire audience could hear her performance. Ladies, I'm afraid we'll have to manage tea service ourselves today. It seems that some people are too important to show basic courtesy to their family's guests. I suppose this is what happens when women forget that family comes before career ambition. The women in the hallway murmured sympathetically, and I heard Beatrice Ashworth say something about young people today and their misplaced priorities. Margaret Thornfield mentioned how she'd always made time for family obligations, regardless of her husband's business demand. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about one afternoon tea service. This was Cordelia publicly humiliating me in front of her entire social circle, positioning herself as the wronged matriarch, and me as the selfish daughter-in-law who'd chosen career over family. She was creating a narrative that would spread through the country club, the school parent groups, and the business community. A story about how Vivian Sterling couldn't be bothered to show proper respect to the women who'd welcomed her into Willowbrook Heights society. I unmuted my microphone and addressed Colonel Martinez with as much professionalism as I could manage. Colonel, I apologize, but I have people in my home office who are disrupting this call despite my requests for privacy. I'm going to need to relocate to ensure we can complete our discussion without further interruptions. Actually, Mrs. Sterling, he replied in a tone that suggested his patience was completely exhausted. Let's reschedule this for tomorrow morning. Please have your team confirm the time through proper channels. The call ended. The most important contract negotiation in our company's history had just been derailed because my mother-in-law thought serving tea to her bridge club was more important than our family's financial future. I sat in my office chair for a moment, listening to the sounds of Cordelia directing her friends toward our dining room, assigning them tasks for setting up their impromptu tea party in my home. I could hear cabinet doors opening as they searched for serving pieces, the clink of china as they arranged place settings, and the low murmur of their conversation as they discussed the scene they'd just witnessed. That's when Marcus appeared in my doorway. He'd clearly been waiting for the call to end before approaching. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the concern in his eyes as he took in my obvious frustration and the chaos happening in the rest of the house. "Ma'am," he said in his calm, professional voice, "is there a problem here?" And that simple question, asked with genuine concern and quiet authority, made me realize that yes, there absolutely was a problem here. There had been a problem for years, and I'd been so busy managing the symptoms that I'd never addressed the disease. That evening, after Cordelia and her social committee had finally left our house, leaving behind a kitchen full of dirty dishes and a dining room that looked like a hurricane had torn through it, I sat in my office staring at the email I needed to send to Colonel Martinez. I had to grovel for another chance at the contract meeting while explaining why the director of strategic partnerships at a cybersecurity company couldn't maintain a professional environment in her own home office. Ethan found me there at 9 p.m., still trying to craft an apology that didn't make our entire company sound incompetent. He walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression he used when he was about to attempt damage control. "So," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "Mom mentioned there was some confusion about her tea party this afternoon." Confusion, as if the problem was miscommunication rather than his mother's complete disregard for boundaries, professional obligations, and basic human courtesy. "Your mother," I said without looking up from my laptop, "cost us the biggest contract in Meridian's history because she decided my business call was less important than serving cucumber sandwiches to her bridge club." Ethan sipped his coffee and chose his words carefully. "I'm sure she didn't realize how important your meeting was. You know how she gets about family gatherings and proper hospitality. Maybe if you'd explain the situation." "Stop." I closed my laptop and looked directly at him. I'm done with the excuses, the explanations, and the assumption that this is somehow my fault for not managing your mother's behavior properly." He looked genuinely confused, which somehow made everything worse. After 3 years of watching his mother systematically boundary stomp our lives, he still couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. "I don't think it's anyone's fault," he said. "These are just misunderstandings that get blown out of proportion. Mom's still adjusting to Dad's death, and she probably sees family time as—" "Your mother," I interrupted, "has been using grief as an excuse to treat me like unpaid household staff for 3 years, and you've been using family harmony as an excuse to avoid addressing it. Well, I'm done being the person who sacrifices everything to keep everyone else comfortable." Ethan set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. "What do you mean you're done?" For the first time in years, I had absolute clarity about what needed to happen. The afternoon's humiliation had burned away all the rationalizations, the family obligation guilt, and the social pressure that had kept me trapped in this pattern. I wasn't angry anymore. I was strategic. "I'm going to prove a point." "Your mother thinks managing our household and family obligations is so simple that it can be interrupted for tea parties. She thinks my work is just playing businesswoman, while she handles the real family responsibilities." "Fine. Let's test that theory." I opened my laptop and pulled up the calendar that had consumed my life for the past 3 years. Every social obligation, every charity commitment, every family tradition that Cordelia had assigned to me was documented in detailed, color-coded entries. School fundraisers, country club events, holiday planning, family gatherings. It was like looking at a full-time job that I'd never been paid for. "This Saturday," I announced, "is the Thornfield anniversary party that I've spent 6 weeks coordinating. The catering, the decorations, the gift selection, the transportation arrangements, all of it. Your mother volunteered me to handle everything just like she always does." Ethan nodded, clearly not seeing where this was going. "Well, I'm not going," I continued, "and I'm not handling any of it. If your mother thinks my responsibilities are so manageable, she can coordinate a formal dinner party for 60 people in 4 days with 0 preparation." The confusion on Ethan's face shifted to concern. "Vivian, you can't just abandon a commitment like that. The Thornfields are important clients, and if something goes wrong, Nothing's being abandoned, I said firmly. It's being transferred to the person who actually volunteered for it. Your mother committed the Sterling family to hosting coordination duty. She can handle the Sterling family coordination duties. I pulled up my phone and started scrolling through contacts. I'm calling Margaret Thornfield right now to let her know that all party coordination should go through Cordelia directly. After all, she's the one who volunteered our services. Wait, Ethan said, reaching for my phone. You can't do that. Mom doesn't have experience with event planning on that scale. She won't know how to handle vendor contracts or logistics coordination. Exactly. I held the phone out of his reach. She'll have to learn, just like I had to learn when she volunteered me for the charity auction, just like I had to learn when she signed me up to chair the school fundraiser, just like I had to learn when she decided I should coordinate every social obligation that crosses her path. I dialed Margaret's number before Ethan could stop me. The conversation was brief and professional. I explained that due to an unexpected business obligation, all remaining party coordination would need to go through Cordelia Whitmore Sterling directly. Margaret sounded confused but agreed to contact Cordelia for the final details. When I hung up, Ethan was staring at me like I'd just declared war on our entire social network. That's not all, I continued, scrolling through my calendar. The Children's Hospital Winter Gala next month. I'm stepping down from the planning committee. The country club's New Year's Eve event that your mother volunteered me to co-chair. She can handle that solo. The school's winter carnival that I've been organizing since October. They'll need to find a replacement coordinator. You can't resign from everything at once, Ethan protested. People are counting on you. These are important community commitments. People are counting on free labor that your mother volunteered without asking. I correct. Well, now they can count on the person who actually made those commitments. I picked up my phone again and started making calls. First to the hospital gala committee, explaining that family obligations required me to step back from my planning role. Then to the country club event coordinator, informing them that Cordelia would be handling all remaining party logistics. Finally to the school's PTO president, recommending they contact Cordelia directly about taking over winter carnival coordination. With each call, I felt light. 3 years of accumulated resentment and exhaustion were lifting with every responsibility I handed back to its rightful owner. But Mom doesn't know how to manage these kinds of events, Ethan said, after I'd finished the calls. She's never had to coordinate vendors and volunteers and logistics. Then she'll learn, I replied. Or she'll discover that event planning isn't as simple as she thought when she was volunteering other people to do the work. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing what had just happened. What about the Thornfield part? If something goes wrong, it could damage our relationship with them. That's not my problem anymore, I said. Your mother created this obligation when she volunteered Sterling Family Services. She can manage Sterling family obligations. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. In fact, I'm going to make this even simpler for everyone. I'm creating a comprehensive list of every social obligation, charity commitment, and family tradition that your mother has assigned to me over the past 3 years. Everything she's volunteered me for, everything she's expected me to coordinate, everything she's taken credit for. The list grew quickly, dozens of events, hundreds of hours of unpaid labor, thousands of dollars in personal expenses for obligations I'd never agreed to take on. When I finished, it was 4 pages long. I'm sending this to your mother tomorrow morning, I announced, along with a very clear message, effective immediately. All social coordination responsibilities are returning to the person who actually volunteered for them. If she wants to commit the Sterling family to community obligations, she can fulfill the Sterling family community obligation. Ethan read over my shoulder as I typed the email that would change everything. Dear Cordelia, after yesterday's incident, I've realized that I may have inadvertently overstepped in managing social obligations that you generously volunteered to coordinate. Attached is a comprehensive list of all upcoming commitments, that I believe you intended to handle personally. I'm confident that your extensive experience in social planning will ensure these events meet your exacting standards. Please let me know if you need any vendor contact information from the preliminary coordination I mistakenly handled. Best regards, Vivian. You can't send that, Ethan said. It's going to create a huge family crisis. No, I replied, scheduling the email to send at 8 a.m. the next morning. It's going to solve a huge family crisis. Your mother will finally get the opportunity to prove how easy these responsibilities are, and I'll finally get the chance to focus on the job that actually pays our bills. I closed my laptop and looked directly at my husband. For 3 years I've been managing a full-time career while working as your mother's unpaid event coordinator. Yesterday she made it clear that she thinks my professional obligations are less important than her social convenience. Fine. Let's see how well she manages her social obligations without my professional support. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. I'm not discussing this, I said firmly. The decision is made. Your mother wanted to be in charge of family social obligations. Now she is. Completely. As I walked out of my office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The freedom that comes from refusing to be responsible for other people's poor decisions. Tomorrow, Cordelia would discover what it actually meant to manage the obligation she'd been volunteering other people to fulfill, and I would finally get to find out what my life looked like when I stopped doing unpaid labor for someone who thought my career was just a hobby. By 8:15 a.m. the next morning, my phone was already ringing. Cordelia's name appeared on the screen before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, but I let it go to voicemail. I had scheduled a full day of actual work, the kind that generated income for our family rather than social capital for my mother-in-law, and I wasn't about to let her derail my professional obligations again. The voicemail was predictably dramatic. Vivian, I don't understand what's happening. Margaret Thornfield called me this morning asking about catering changes and vendor confirmations. I think there's been some sort of miscommunication. Please call me back immediately so we can sort this out. There was no miscommunication. There was just accountability arriving at Cordelia's doorstep for the first time in 3 years. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with a text. Emergency at Mom's house. Can you call her please, Ethan? I glanced at the message and went back to my spreadsheet. Whatever emergency Cordelia was experiencing could be resolved the same way she'd always expected me to resolve emergencies, by figuring it out herself. Marcus appeared in my office doorway around 10 a.m., carrying his usual morning coffee, and wearing an expression that suggested he'd been fielding unusual communications. Ma'am, he said carefully, Mrs. Whitmore Sterling has called the house 3 times this morning. She's asked to speak with you about some urgent family matters. Should I continue taking messages? Please do, I replied without looking up from my computer. And Marcus, if she shows up here unannounced today, she's not welcome. I'm working. He nodded with what looked suspiciously like approval. Understood. I'll handle any unexpected visitors. Around noon I received an email from Margaret Thornfield that made me smile for the first time in weeks. The subject line read, Thornfield Anniversary Party, Coordination Confusion. The message was a masterpiece of polite bewilderment. Margaret explained that she'd spoken with Cordelia about finalizing party arrangements, but there seemed to be some confusion about vendor contracts and timeline logistics. Cordelia had mentioned that she might need to research some options for services that were supposedly already confirmed. Margaret was wondering if perhaps there had been a miscommunication about who was handling what aspects of the coordination. I replied professionally, expressing my regret that I couldn't assist due to conflicting business obligations, but suggesting that Cordelia's extensive experience with social planning would ensure a beautiful celebration. I copied Cordelia on the response, just to make sure she understood that the coordination responsibility was entirely hers now. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time it was Ethan, calling from his office. Vivian, what exactly did you do? He asked without preamble. Mom called me 3 times this morning. She's saying you've abandoned the Thornfield party and left her to handle everything with 4 days' notice. I didn't abandon anything, I replied calmly. I transferred responsibility for an obligation that your mother created back to the person who created it. She volunteered Sterling Family Services to the Thornfields. Now she gets to provide Sterling Family Services to the Thornfields. But she doesn't know how to coordinate a formal dinner party for 60 people, Ethan protested. She's never had to manage vendors and catering contracts and… Then she'll learn, I interrupted, the same way I learned when she volunteered me for the charity auction. The same way I learned when she signed me up to chair every committee in Willowbrook Heights. Your mother is an intelligent woman who managed a social calendar for 35 years. I'm sure she'll figure it out. There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally Ethan said, what if she can't? What if the party is a disaster? Then the Thornfields will know exactly who volunteered to coordinate their anniversary celebration. I replied, and your mother will learn an important lesson about the difference between volunteering other people's time and volunteering her own time. I could hear Ethan sighing through the phone. This is going to create a huge mess, Vivian. No, I said firmly, this is going to clean up a huge mess. A mess that's been growing for 3 years, while everyone pretended it was normal for your mother to volunteer my labor for her social obligations. After hanging up, I turned my attention back to actual work. I had the rescheduled Defense Department call at 2 p.m., and I was determined to conduct it without any interruptions from family drama. I closed my office door, put my phone on silent, and spent an hour reviewing contract specifications and compliance requirements. The call with Colonel Martinez went perfectly, without the chaos of unexpected visitors and dramatic confrontations. I was able to focus completely on the technical details and strategic implications of the cybersecurity contract. We finalized terms that exceeded my original projections, and I secured additional service options that would generate recurring revenue for the next 5 years. When the call ended, I felt the satisfaction that comes from doing work you're actually qualified for, solving problems you're actually responsible for, and getting paid for expertise you've actually developed. It was a feeling I'd almost forgotten during 3 years of providing unpaid event coordination services for Cordelia's social calendar. My peaceful afternoon was interrupted around 4 p.m. when Marcus knocked on my office door again. Ma'am, he said, Mrs. Whitmore Sterling is here. She's requesting an immediate meeting about urgent family business. She seems quite agitated. Through my office window I could see Cordelia's car in our driveway. She was probably expecting me to drop everything and solve whatever crisis had emerged from her first day of actual responsibility. Please tell Mrs. Whitmore Sterling that I'm in meetings until 6 p.m., I said. If she'd like to schedule a conversation, she can call tomorrow to arrange a convenient time. Marcus nodded and returned to the front door. A few minutes later, I heard raised voices in the foyer, Cordelia demanding immediate access, and Marcus politely but firmly explaining that I was unavailable. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes before I heard her car pulling out of the driveway. At 5:30 my phone buzzed with a text from my sister-in-law, Patricia. What did you do to Cordelia? She called crying about being abandoned during a family emergency. Something about a party disaster. I replied, Cordelia's learning to manage social obligations she volunteered for. Not an emergency, just accountability. Patricia responded immediately. She says you're trying to sabotage her reputation in the community. I'm trying to focus on my actual job instead of doing unpaid work for someone who thinks my career is a hobby. I replied, if Cordelia's reputation depends on other people's labor, perhaps that's something she should consider. The conversation ended there, but I knew the family phone tree was probably buzzing with Cordelia's version of events. She was likely positioning herself as the victim of my sudden unreasonableness, rather than acknowledging that she was facing consequences for 3 years of boundary violation. Around 6 p.m. I received an email from the Children's Hospital Gala Committee, thanking me for my service and expressing regret that family obligations were requiring me to step back from planning duties. They mentioned that Mrs. Whitmore Sterling had graciously agreed to take over coordination responsibilities, and that they were confident in her ability to deliver an exceptional event. I smiled as I read their diplomatic language. By tomorrow they'd discover exactly what Cordelia's event coordination abilities looked like when she couldn't delegate the actual work to someone else. That evening, I cooked dinner for my family without interruption. No unexpected visitors, volunteering my services for community obligation. No phone calls about party logistics that I'd somehow become responsible for. No dramatic crises requiring immediate attention from the family's unpaid problem solver. Sophia and Oliver told me about their school day while we ate homemade lasagna. Ethan helped clear the table without being asked, and Marcus joined us for dessert, sharing stories about his daughter's college applications that made the kids laugh. It was the kind of peaceful family evening I'd been trying to protect for 3 years, the kind that had been constantly interrupted by Cordelia's social emergencies and community obligations. As I tucked the children into bed that night, Sophia asked, "Mommy, why did Grandma Cordelia seem upset when she came over today?" Grandma Cordelia is learning to handle some responsibilities that she volunteered for, I explained. Sometimes learning new things can feel overwhelming at first, but I'm sure she'll figure it out. Oliver nodded sagely, like when I had to learn to tie my shoes by myself instead of asking you to do it. Exactly like that, I said, kissing his forehead. Sometimes people need to practice doing things for themselves. Later that evening, as I reviewed emails and prepared for the next day's client meetings, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The calm that comes from having reasonable boundaries and realistic responsibilities. Tomorrow, Cordelia would continue learning what it meant to manage the obligations she'd been volunteering other people to fulfill. And I would continue focusing on the work that actually supported our family's future, rather than someone else's social ambition. Friday morning brought the first real proof that Cordelia's confidence in her event management abilities had been drastically misplaced. I was reviewing quarterly client reports when Marcus appeared in my office doorway with an expression that suggested he had news. "Ma'am," he said, closing the door behind him. "I thought you should know that Mrs. Whitmore Sterling has made 7 phone calls in the past hour to various vendors. The conversations have been challenging." Marcus had a gift for diplomatic understatement, so I knew challenging probably meant catastrophic. "What kind of challenging?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "She's attempting to make last-minute changes to contracts that were finalized weeks ago," he explained. "The florist informed her that custom arrangements require a 2-week minimum notice. The catering company explained that menu modifications this close to the event would require overtime charges that exceed her budget authorization. And the rental company mentioned that she doesn't appear to be listed as an authorized contact on the equipment contracts." Of course she wasn't listed as an authorized contact. I had negotiated those contracts months ago, when Cordelia first volunteered me to coordinate the Thornfield anniversary party. The vendors had my information, my credit card authorizations, and my approval signatures because I was the person who'd actually handled the logistics. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Janet from Willowbrook Catering. Your mother-in-law is requesting menu changes for the Thornfield event tomorrow. She doesn't seem to have access to the original order details. Can you call me urgent?" I deleted the message without responding. Janet would have to work directly with the person who'd commissioned her services, even if that person was frantically realizing she had no idea what she'd actually committed to. Around 11 a.m., I received a call from Beatrice Ashworth that I did answer, mostly out of curiosity about how the community was processing Cordelia's sudden hands-on involvement in event coordination. "Vivian, dear," Beatrice said in the tone she used when she was fishing for gossip. "Cordelia mentioned that you're dealing with some business obligations that are preventing you from helping with the Thornfield celebration. I hope everything is all right with Ethan's company." The question was loaded with implications. Beatrice was clearly trying to determine whether our family was facing financial difficulties that might require me to prioritize work over social obligation. Cordelia had probably suggested that only serious business problems would justify abandoning community commitments. "Everything's excellent with Meridian Solutions," I replied cheerfully. "In fact, we just secured the largest contract in the company's history. I'm simply focusing on my actual responsibilities rather than managing obligations that other people volunteered for." There was a pause while Beatrice processed this response. "Oh," she said finally. "Well, I'm sure Cordelia will handle everything beautifully. She has such experience with elegant entertaining." "I'm certain she will," I agreed. "After all, she's the one who committed to providing coordination services." After hanging up, I realized that Cordelia's version of events was already circulating through her social network. She was probably portraying my withdrawal as evidence of business problems or family crisis rather than acknowledging that she'd volunteered services she couldn't deliver. The afternoon brought a series of increasingly frantic developments that Marcus kept me informed about with his usual professional discretion. Apparently, Cordelia had discovered that the party venue required setup to begin at 6 a.m. Saturday morning, but she hadn't arranged for anyone to be there to receive deliveries or direct vendor placement. She'd also learned that the elegant menu she'd been taking credit for included several dishes that required specialized preparation equipment she didn't own, and cooking techniques she'd never attempted. The catering company had assumed that the home kitchen coordination would be handled by someone who understood the logistics of serving a formal dinner for 60 people. Most critically, she'd realized that the party's timeline required precise coordination between multiple vendors arriving at different times throughout the day. The florists needed access first to set up centerpieces before the rental company delivered additional tables. The catering team required kitchen prep time before the musicians arrived for sound checks, and someone needed to be available all day to solve the inevitable problems that arise during complex event execution. By 3 p.m. my phone was ringing constantly. Cordelia, Ethan, Patricia, and several family friends were all trying to reach me about the family emergency that required immediate intervention. I let every call go to voicemail and continued working on actual business matters that actually paid our bill. The voicemails grew increasingly desperate as the day progressed. Cordelia's first message was still maintaining the pretense that this was a simple misunderstanding that could be quickly resolved. Vivian, I think there might have been some confusion about vendor schedule. Could you call me back with the contact information for the party coordinator? I seem to have missed some details. By her fourth message, the facade was cracking. Vivian, this is becoming urgent. The catering company is saying they need kitchen access tomorrow morning, but I don't understand their setup requirements. Margaret is going to be very upset if there are problems with her anniversary celebration. Her final message, left around 5 p.m., was pure panic. Vivian, please call me back immediately. Nothing is working the way it's supposed to and I can't reach half the vendors. The florist is threatening to cancel because of contract authorization issues, and the rental company says they need a site survey before tomorrow's delivery. I don't know what to do. She didn't know what to do because for 3 years she'd been volunteering other people to figure out what to do while she accepted credit for their problem-solving abilities. Marcus intercepted me as I was preparing to leave the office around 6 p.m. Ma'am, he said, Mrs. Whitmore Sterling is in the driveway again. She appears to be quite distressed and is requesting immediate assistance with what she's calling a family crisis. Through the window I could see Cordelia sitting in her car, apparently steeling herself for another confrontation. She'd probably spent the entire day discovering exactly how complex event coordination could be when you couldn't delegate the actual work to someone else. Please tell Miss Whitmore Sterling that I'm not available this evening, I said. If she needs assistance with party planning, she should contact the professional event coordinators she hired to help her. Marcus looked puzzled. She hired professional coordinator. If she committed to providing services she's not qualified to deliver, hiring qualified help would be the responsible solution. Marcus nodded and went to deliver the message. Through my office window I watched him approach Cordelia's car and speak to her briefly. Even from a distance I could see her animated gesturing as she explained whatever crisis she was facing. Marcus listened politely, then returned to the house. She's requesting a brief meeting to discuss family obligations and community commitments, he reported. She mentioned something about the family's reputation being at stake. Our family's reputation will be just fine, I said, collecting my files and preparing to end the workday. Ms. Whitmore Sterling volunteered to coordinate a social event, and now she's learning what event coordination actually involves. If she needs help, she should hire professional assistants or ask the people who originally recommended her services. That evening, I received a group text from Patricia that included Ethan, his uncle David, and several extended family members. The message read, Cordelia needs help with Mom and Dad's anniversary party tomorrow. Family emergency requiring all hands on deck. Please respond ASAP. I replied to the group. Not a family emergency. Cordelia volunteered to coordinate this event, and should handle the coordination responsibilities she committed to. The individual responses came quickly. David texted, "Can't you just help her this one?" Patricia wrote, "She's really struggling and might need professional assistance." Even Ethan's cousin Michael chimed in, "Surely family comes before whatever work thing you're dealing with." I replied to the group chat one final time. Cordelia has extensive experience with social planning and community events. I'm confident she'll find solutions to any challenges she's facing. If she needs professional assistance, she should hire qualified coordinator. Then I muted the conversation and focused on family dinner with my children, who were happily oblivious to the drama surrounding their grandmother's first real encounter with accountability. As we ate homemade pizza and discussed Sophia's upcoming school science fair, I reflected on how peaceful our home felt without the constant undercurrent of social obligations and community emergencies that had dominated our lives for 3 years. Tomorrow, the Thornfield anniversary party would happen, either successfully with Cordelia rising to meet the challenges she'd volunteered to handle, or unsuccessfully with everyone finally understanding exactly what those challenges involved. Either way, the Sterling family's reputation would survive, and I would spend Saturday focusing on my own family rather than cleaning up someone else's poor planning. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of silence that follows a storm, the eerie calm that comes when you're no longer responsible for managing other people's crises. I woke up naturally at 7:30 a.m. instead of being jolted awake by emergency phone calls about vendor deliveries and setup schedules. For the first time in 3 years, I had a weekend morning that belonged entirely to my family. Sophia and Oliver were already awake, building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions in the living room while Marcus supervised their architectural effort. The sight of my children playing peacefully without the undercurrent of party preparation stress made me realize just how much tension had become our family's normal baseline. "Any word from the anniversary party front?" I asked Marcus as he handed me a cup of coffee. His expression remained diplomatically neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he had information. "Mrs. Whitmore Sterling has been quite active this morning," he said carefully. "Multiple vendor vehicles have been arriving at her residence since 6 a.m., and there appears to be some confusion about coordination protocol." Through our kitchen window, which faced in the direction of Cordelia's house, I could see unusual traffic on Maple Ridge Drive, delivery trucks and rental vans moving back and forth like confused ants. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since sunrise, but I'd turned off all notifications except for actual emergencies involving my children. Around 9 a.m., Ethan appeared in the kitchen looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. He'd clearly been fielding crisis communications since dawn, and his expression suggested that Cordelia's event coordination abilities were performing exactly as I'd predicted. "The florist can't complete the centerpiece setup because Mom doesn't have the right vases," he announced without preamble. "The catering company is threatening to cancel because she can't provide the kitchen access they need for prep work. And the rental company delivered tables to the wrong location because Mom gave them her address instead of the Thornfield estate." I sipped my coffee and watched Oliver demonstrate his fort's secret entrance to Sophia. "That sounds challenging. I'm sure your mother will figure out solutions." Ethan stared at me like I was speaking in code. "Vivian, the party is in 8 hours. The Thornfields are expecting 60 guests for a formal anniversary celebration, and nothing is working according to plan. This is going to be a complete disaster. Only if your mother can't handle the responsibilities she volunteered for," I replied calmly. "She's had these coordination duties for less than 48 hours. I managed similar challenges for 3 years while maintaining a full-time career. I'm confident she'll adapt." My phone rang, displaying Margaret Thornfield's number. Ethan looked at me expectantly, but I let it go to voicemail. Whatever crisis Margaret was experiencing would need to be resolved by the person who'd committed to providing coordination services. "You have to answer that," Ethan said. "Margaret and Richard are our biggest clients. If this party is a disaster, it could damage our business relationship permanently." "Then your mother should ensure it's not a disaster," I said. "She volunteered Sterling Family Services. She can provide Sterling Family Services." Around 10:30, Patricia arrived at our house in full crisis management mode. She swept into our kitchen like a tornado, her hair disheveled and her usual composure completely shattered. "Vivian, thank God you're here," she said breathlessly. "We need your help immediately. Cordelia's having a complete breakdown. The vendors are threatening to leave. The Thornfields are calling every hour for updates, and she's locked herself in her bedroom claiming she can't handle everything. I looked up from the coloring book I was sharing with Oliver. That sounds stressful for her, I said. Perhaps she should consider hiring professional event coordinators to assist with the obligations she committed to. Patricia blinked at me as if I'd suggested solving the crisis with interpretive dance. There's no time to hire professionals. The party is tonight. You know how to handle these vendors and coordinate these logistics. You have to step in and fix this. I don't have to do anything, I replied. Cordelia created this obligation. Cordelia can fulfill this obligation. But she doesn't know how, Patricia protested. She's never had to manage vendor contracts and timeline coordination and all the technical details you've been handling. Then she shouldn't have volunteered to handle vendor contracts and timeline coordination, I said. This is a valuable learning experience for her. Patricia's voice rose to a level that made both children look up from their fort construction. This isn't about learning experience. This is about the Thornfield family anniversary party being a complete catastrophe that will humiliate our entire family. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the raised voice. His presence had an immediate calming effect on Patricia, who suddenly seemed to remember that family drama shouldn't be conducted in front of witnesses. Perhaps, Marcus suggested diplomatically, Mrs. Whitmore Sterling could contact the professional event planning services in town. Several companies specialize in last-minute coordination assistance. Patricia turned to him gratefully. That's exactly what I told her, but she says she can't admit to needing help because it would damage her reputation as someone who understands proper entertaining. The irony was breathtaking. Cordelia would rather risk complete party failure than acknowledge that event coordination required actual skills and preparation. She'd spent 3 years taking credit for my work while maintaining that proper entertaining was simply a matter of good breeding and social connections. My phone buzzed with a text from Beatrice Ashworth. Heard there are some challenges with tonight's celebration. Should we bring backup appetizers just in case? The news was already spreading through Willowbrook Heights' social network. By noon, everyone would know that Cordelia Sterling Whitmore, the self-proclaimed expert on proper entertaining, was struggling to coordinate a dinner party. Around 11:15 my phone rang again. This time it was Richard Thornfield himself, which meant the situation had escalated beyond vendor difficulties into client relations territory. I answered professionally. Good morning, Mr. Thornfield. Vivian, he said in the tone he used for business negotiations. Margaret tells me there have been some coordination challenges with tonight's celebration. As someone who appreciates your project management skills in our professional relationship, I'm hoping you might be able to assist with resolving these issues. Richard was trying to solve the party crisis by appealing to our business relationship, which was both smart and completely inappropriate. He was essentially asking me to provide unpaid personal services to protect a professional contract. I appreciate your confidence, I replied. But Miss Whitmore Sterling is handling all coordination responsibilities for your celebration. I'm certain she'll resolve any challenges that have arisen. Well, Richard said carefully, Margaret spoke with Cordelia this morning, and there seemed to be some confusion about vendor management and timeline logistics. Perhaps you could provide some guidance. Mrs. Whitmore Sterling has extensive experience with social planning. If she needs professional assistance, I'd recommend she contact qualified event coordination services. After I hung up, Ethan was staring at me with something approaching disbelief. You just told our biggest client that his anniversary party coordination problems aren't your responsibility. They aren't my responsibility, I said. Your mother volunteered to provide those services. I've never spoken to Richard Thornfield about party planning, because I was never supposed to be involved in party planning. Patricia was pacing our kitchen like a caged animal. This is insane, she muttered. The whole family is going to be humiliated because you're refusing to help with a simple event coordination issue. Simple? I looked at her directly. Coordinating a formal dinner party for 60 people requires vendor management, timeline logistics, crisis resolution, and professional expertise that takes years to develop. If it's simple, your mother-in-law should have no trouble handling it herself. Around noon, Marcus received a phone call that he answered in his usual professional manner. When he hung up, he looked thoughtful. That was Mrs. Whitmore Sterling, he announced. She's requesting security assistance with what she described as crowd control issues at her residence. Apparently, multiple vendors are demanding immediate payment for services they're unable to provide due to coordination failures. The situation was escalating beyond party planning into potential legal territory. Vendors were probably threatening to abandon the event entirely unless someone could resolve the authorization and payment issues that Cordelia couldn't handle. "Did you agree to assist?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. I explained that my responsibilities are limited to this household's security needs. I suggested she contact local law enforcement if she's experiencing disputes with service providers. By 1 p.m., it was clear that the Thornfield anniversary party was going to be either a miracle of last-minute problem-solving or a spectacular demonstration of what happens when someone volunteers for responsibilities they can't fulfill. Either way, Cordelia was finally learning the difference between taking credit for other people's work and actually doing the work yourself. The Thornfield anniversary party that evening became legendary in Willowbrook Heights social circles, though not for the reasons Cordelia had intended. By Sunday morning, the story of what actually transpired had spread through the country club network, with the speed and accuracy that only comes from witnessing a spectacular public awakening. According to multiple sources, the evening began with guests arriving to find the estate's main dining room only half decorated, with elegant floral centerpieces on some tables and empty vases on others. The catering situation was even more telling. Appetizers consisted of store-bought cheese platters and grocery store crackers, because Cordelia had discovered at 3 p.m. that the elaborate hors d'oeuvres menu required 6 hours of preparation time she hadn't accounted for. The main course timing was so mismanaged that guests waited 2 hours between courses, while Cordelia frantically tried to coordinate a kitchen staff that had received conflicting instructions all day. Several guests later mentioned that they'd offered to help, only to be told by a clearly overwhelmed Cordelia that everything was under control while she visibly struggled to manage basic serving logistics. But the most revealing moment came when Margaret Thornfield asked about the anniversary slideshow that was supposed to accompany dessert, a presentation that required technical setup and coordination with the evening's timeline. Cordelia admitted, in front of 60 witnesses, that she hadn't realized how complicated the equipment would be and had never tested the audio-visual components. The evening concluded with guests helping to clear tables and organize leftover food while Cordelia sat in the corner looking like she'd survived a natural disaster. Multiple people reported that she kept apologizing for technical difficulties, without acknowledging that the difficulties stemmed from her complete lack of preparation for responsibilities she'd confidently committed to. Marcus, who had been discreetly monitoring social media and community communications for security purposes, provided me with updates on Sunday morning that painted a picture of swift and dramatic social recalibration. "The consensus appears to be eye-opening," he reported diplomatically. "Several prominent community members have expressed new appreciation for the complexity of event coordination." Beatrice Ashworth had posted on Facebook, "After witnessing last night's challenges, I have tremendous new respect for people who make hosting elegant gatherings look effortless. Event planning is clearly much more complicated than it appears from the guest perspective." Margaret Thornfield's Instagram story included a gracious thank you message that read, "Sometimes the most memorable celebrations are the ones that remind us to appreciate the people who usually make everything look seamless behind the scenes." Even more telling was Priscilla Vanderberg's text message to me Sunday afternoon. "I owe you an enormous apology. I had no idea how much work you were doing for all those events." Cordelia's struggle last night made it very clear how skilled you've been at coordination logistics. By Monday morning, my phone was buzzing with calls from every organization that Cordelia had committed me to over the past 3 years. The Children's Hospital Gala Committee called first, asking if I might consider returning to help with their event plan. The country club's New Year's coordination team left a voicemail expressing hope that I could provide guidance for their upcoming celebration. Most surprisingly, I received a call from the Willowbrook Chamber of Commerce asking if I'd be interested in offering professional event management services to local businesses and organizations. Apparently, Saturday's disaster had highlighted just how few people in our community actually possessed the skills they'd been taking for granted. "There seems to be significant demand for qualified coordination expertise," the chamber president explained. "Your reputation for successful event management has people requesting your services specifically." The irony was perfect. 3 years of being voluntold to provide unpaid coordination labor had inadvertently established me as the area's most experienced event planner. What Cordelia had dismissed as simple social obligations had actually been sophisticated project management that required professional expertise. But the most significant transformation happened within my own family. Ethan, who had witnessed the complete collapse of his mother's confident assumptions about event coordination, finally understood what I'd been trying to explain for 3 years. "I had no idea," he said Sunday evening as we discussed the weekend's event. "I mean, I knew party planning took effort, but I didn't realize it required actual professional skills. Mom made it look like it was just about having good taste and social connections. Because I was doing all the actual work while she took credit for the results," I replied. She genuinely believed that coordination was about making phone calls and giving directions, not about understanding vendor contracts and timeline logistics. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "A huge apology. I spent 3 years dismissing your complaints as personality conflicts when you were actually being exploited for professional services." The conversation led to our first honest discussion about family boundaries and mutual respect that we'd ever had. For the first time, Ethan acknowledged that his conflict avoidance had enabled his mother's behavior and left me to handle inappropriate demands without support. "I need to have a direct conversation with her," he said. "Not about this weekend specifically, but about the pattern of behavior that led to this weekend. She needs to understand that volunteering other people's time and expertise isn't acceptable, regardless of family relationship." Even more importantly, we discussed implementing permanent changes to prevent future boundary violations. No more automatic acceptance of social obligations without family consultation. No more assumption that my professional skills were available for unpaid community service. And absolutely no more tolerance for anyone treating my career as less important than social convenience. The broader family dynamic shifted as well. Patricia called Tuesday morning to have a conversation that would have been impossible before Saturday's reality check. "I need to admit that I've been part of the problem," she said. "I've been encouraging Cordelia's behavior because I thought you were just being difficult about family obligations. Watching her struggle this weekend made me realize how much actual work you've been doing." She went on to explain that several family members had reached out to her with similar realizations. Cordelia's public demonstration of incompetence had forced everyone to acknowledge that event coordination required genuine expertise, not just social authority. "We all took your capabilities for granted," Patricia continued. "We assumed that because you made everything look easy, it actually was easy. We were wrong." Most surprisingly, David called Wednesday evening to apologize for years of silent enablement. "I should have spoken up when I saw how she was treating you," he said. "I kept telling myself it wasn't my business, but family members exploiting each other's labor is everyone's business." The community transformation was equally dramatic. Organizations that had relied on Cordelia volunteering my services were suddenly offering paid consultation opportunities for legitimate event planning work. The recognition that coordination expertise had monetary value changed how people approached requesting my assistance. But the most meaningful change was in my children's perception of family dynamics. Sophia, who had watched the weekend's drama unfold, asked insightful questions about fairness and responsibility that showed she'd learned important lessons about standing up for yourself. Grandma Cordelia learned that promising to do something means you have to actually know how to do it, right? She asked. "Like when I promised to clean my room, I can't ask you to do it for me." "Exactly right," I confirmed. "When you volunteer to handle something, you're responsible for actually handling it yourself." Oliver nodded seriously. "And if someone keeps asking you to do their job, you can say no. You can, and should say no," I agree. "Helping people occasionally is kind, but doing someone else's responsibilities all the time isn't fair to you." By the end of the week, I'd established clear policies for future event involvement: paid consultation only, written contracts for any coordination services, and advance approval required for any use of my professional expertise. The days of being voluntold for community obligations were permanently over. Friday evening, I received a handwritten note that surprised me more than anything else that had happened. It was from Cordelia, delivered by mail rather than dramatic doorstep confrontation. "Vivian, It read, "I owe you an acknowledgement that is long overdue. This week has taught me that I fundamentally misunderstood the nature and complexity of the work you've been doing. I apologize for taking your expertise for granted and for dismissing your professional capability. I would like to discuss how we can move forward with appropriate respect for everyone's time and abilities." It wasn't a complete apology. There was no acknowledgement of the manipulation, boundary violations, or systematic exploitation that had defined our relationship for 3 years. But it was recognition that I possessed valuable skills that deserved respect rather than assumed availability. More importantly, it was evidence that consequences had created learning in a way that 3 years of polite conversations never could have achieved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.